Welcome to the 7th edition of Business Chronicles. I am Sebastian Arwan.
And I am Vince Rangasamy. Today we are welcoming Shamnaz Sufoj, an economist based in Italy, for an interesting discussion on economy.
So let's now delve into the 7th episode. Dear Shamnaz, welcome to the 7th episode of Business Chronicle. It's a pleasure to have you today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
To start, can you tell us a bit more about your journey in the field of economics?
Okay, so one's education has a substantial impact on one's life journey. And my journey in economics started when I was studying economics as a subject at college. Okay, I was simply just fascinated by the subject of economics. Well, because I was intrigued by how economics could govern our daily lives and how eventually it would shape and make an economy. My goal was to be able to use economics to improve people's life. So my goal was to uncover the underlying mechanisms that make some people rich and others poor. And so I really wanted to understand things at a deeper level. Fortunately, I got a scholarship, so I went on to study economics at university level in Bangalore, India. When I came back and taught economics, it was really a gratifying job, but my journey with economics continued in the field because I decided to put what I have learned into practice. So I worked with SMEs and then in training, but still it wasn't enough for me. I was also doing my master's while I was working, but something was missing and I wanted to understand things at a much deeper level. And I thought the only way to do this was to pursue a PhD, a doctoral study. I competed and got a scholarship to pursue my PhD in Italy. And from now on, I'm still continuing with research in economics, and my expertise now is in international trade, small island economies, network analysis, and I also master fields such as regional integration, labor market economics, and regional economics also. So my goal in studying economics was to help improve people's lives. Okay? And I can say that I've managed to contribute in a small way in improving people's lives while I was working for the UN as an economic consultant. In fact, I have conceptualized and designed the Africa Regional Integration Index. Maybe you've heard of it, it's called ARI.
Yeah.
So, ARI is a tool to assess regional integration. And ARI was a precursor of other integration arrangements on the continent. You've already heard of the AfCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area. So through ARI, many government officials, many countries managed to see where their position on regional integration was exactly. So many of them were pushed, if I can use this word, to join the AfCFTA just to improve their ranking on regional integration. So this was really a useful and helpful tool. So as I was saying, the index contributed enormously in shaping policy on the continent, okay? Especially the AfCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area, because governments could see their position by using the index. They could see where they stand on regional integration. So many of them were pushed to join the AfCFTA just to improve their position on the index. So this is one interesting contribution that I have made, and hopefully it will help improve people's lives.
We're sure it will.
As an expert in international trade and a key contributor to the ARI, your insights will be invaluable. Could you share with our viewers the purpose of ARI and its significance for Mauritius and other African nations.
Okay, so regional integration is not a new phenomenon. Following the success of the European Union, the EU, many countries around the world decided to regroup regionally. And there were a surge of regional projects around the world. You've heard of NAFTA, of Mercosur, of ASEAN in the East. Many developing countries, they saw regional integration as a means to improve their economy, especially through industrialization and greater diversification. In Africa also, there were many regional projects. However, these projects were isolated and they were not so effective, especially when we compare regional integration in Africa and in the Asia-Pacific region. The latter was doing much, much better. And in these difficult times, there was a need to assess and monitor regional integration on the African continent in an effective and, let's say, practical way. However, assessing regional integration is not an easy task. The concept itself, regional integration, it is an elusive concept, they say, because it means different things to different people. The meaning of regional integration also evolves. Okay? Some time back, regional integration meant only economic integration, but today the meaning is much broader. So regional integration, okay, draws now from various disciplines. We say it is multifaceted. The Africa Regional Integration Index is itself a multidimensional index that reflects the status and efforts of regional integration for 54 African countries across 5 dimensions and several indicators on the continent, but also across the regional economic communities, for instance, the COMESA or the SADC. As far as its purpose is concerned, its primary purpose, of course, is to rank countries. But why use an index? An index here is a very useful and practical tool that policymakers can use and easily grasp. In which way? Because the index will be able to transform those different dimensions into one single number, or here a ranking. And this number or this rank can easily be read by anyone, a non-expert, but if you are an expert, you can also go deeper and delve into the different dimensions of the index also.
And Shamnaz, how does ARI assess regional integration? And what are the main dimensions it evaluates?
So let us start by defining the term integration itself. So there are different forms and levels of integration. In his pioneering book, Bela Balassa, a famous economist, he defined integration as the abolition of discrimination between countries. That's a very formal definition and quite restricted. Today, integration has taken a much larger meaning. It not only accounts for the economic, but also for other dimensions, like the social dimension. I would define integration today as the convergence of national policies towards the establishment of regional institutions that aim at achieving some common objectives that are economically, socially, and also environmentally important. So to account for these different dimensions or aspects, ARI is comprised of 5 key dimensions: a trade dimension, a productive dimension, a macroeconomic dimension, and a free movement of people dimension as well as an infrastructural dimension. All these dimensions, they are drawn from the economic literature, but they are also derived from the experience of countries, that is, partners, okay, and people in general. After careful sensitivity analysis and other robustness checks, the index is made up of 16 indicators, which make up, of course, the 5 dimensions I mentioned before. How is the index computed itself? We use a statistical method, something which is called principal components analysis, which is an objective way of assigning weights to dimensions, but also to indicators. So in the end, we've got a credible index that can assess regional integration in an objective manner. Okay, so ARI allows countries to measure their performance on the continent, the whole continent in Africa, across 54 countries, but also in each of their respective RECs, that is, regional economic communities, and there are 8 of them. For instance, Mauritius is well integrated on the continent as a whole. It ranks 5th, while South Africa is the best performer. However, regional integration on the continent as a whole is quite low, with an average score of 0.3. So ARI allows a country to disaggregate this ranking into the different dimensions. So a country can assess how they perform on trade, productive, infrastructural, and so on. So knowing that you are 5th on the continent as a whole doesn't give much information in itself, right? So you can dig deeper into the dimensions. For instance, let's take the case of our country. Mauritius has a quite high performance on the macroeconomic dimension, but its performance on the trade and productive dimensions is relatively poor. So one can go even deeper to assess how one is performing on each single indicator. As an example, okay, the macroeconomic dimension is made up of 3 indicators: bilateral investment treaties, regional convertibility of currencies, and regional inflation differential. So if you want to see how you perform in each of these single indicators, okay, you can look at these numbers. So this is important because it will allow policymakers to make informed decisions and take specific measures to tackle whatever problem there is.
How can Mauritius benefit from the AFCFTA agreement, and what steps should we take to maximize these benefits?
Okay, so being part of the AFCFTA, which is the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, is potentially being part of a huge market. In fact, the world's largest free trade area in terms of membership and coverage. The AFCFTA have the potential of covering a market of 1.3 billion people with a total GDP of about 3.4 trillion. So there are a number of studies that enumerate the various benefits of the AFCFTA under the right conditions, of course. Most of the benefit would materialize in the long term. So there is one study that points out that the elimination of tariffs on goods by 2040 can increase the value of trade by about 15 to 25%, depending, of course, on the degree of liberalization that a country has adopted. At present, taking the Mauritian context, Mauritian intra-African trade is insignificant, except for its trade with South Africa. So here, there is a lot of potential. There is also an investment protocol in the AFCFTA, which promises to make investment much easier, especially through the standardization of procedures and regulation. There is even a one-stop shop. Our country is already an open economy, so potential welfare benefits in general will be relatively lower. But still, these are benefits. So, more importantly, we should think strategically and in the long term. In these times, in these difficult times of global economic crisis and health crisis, diversification is the key. Diversification of markets, I said that the AFCFTA can cover a market of about 3.4 trillion. So this is really an opportunity for the country to grasp. Indeed, with the AFCFTA, Mauritius is posing itself as a gateway to Africa, a platform from which third parties, such as China, and especially with the new agreement, can access the African continent. But to really become this trading platform, the country should maintain its competitiveness. It should reinforce its traditional strengths. For instance, the country has always played the political stability card. So here, we have to realize that our scores on these indicators are not so bright anymore. Let's take, for example, the CPI, the Corruption Perception Index. Our scores have been declining over the years, slowly but still declining, because now we are behind the Seychelles. And even the small country like Cape Verde and Rwanda are ahead of us. So when the mechanism of corruption sets in, it is really difficult to dismantle. So to play on words, corruption will corrupt many of the growth indicators, such as quality and hence productivity, and it will favor inequality and inefficiency.
And Shamnaz, we would like to discuss on another important topic, highly relevant to the Mauritians, the depreciation of the rupee. Lately, the Mauritian rupee has significantly depreciated over the years, with a notable decline of 48% vis-à-vis the USD during the last 10 years. In contrast, the Singapore dollar, the Seychelles rupee, and the Maldivian rupiah have only depreciated by 5 to 6%. Could you explain the main factors contributing to the depreciation of the rupee?
So some of the main variables that are used in exchange rate forecasting are the interest rate, current account balance, inflation rate, as well as reserve accumulation. So when we look at the current account balance for Mauritius and compare it with that of the Seychelles, there is obviously an evident difference. We can see that from 2001 onward, Seychelles' current account balance remained fairly stable. However, that of Mauritius started to be in deficit. And indeed, the current account deficit for Mauritius reached more than 1.5 billion in 2011 and also in 2021. As for the Maldives, its currency is pegged to the US dollar, so there is no basis for comparison. It should be noted in general that appreciation and depreciation of a floating currency is influenced by both local and international factors. And recently, with the health crisis and containment measures, foreign earnings plummeted in our case. academic scholars, they found that speculation, currency speculation, has a lot to do with exchange rate distortion or variation, as well as for the imbalance in current accounts. There is something that is called carry trade, which is a concept that you guys at Rogers Capital definitely are well versed in. So it refers to financial operations that are driven by interest rate differentials. In times of crisis, indeed, countries with high interest rates, they tend to experience depreciation initially, and then a currency will start to appreciate when the crisis starts to diminish, let's say. In our very complex economic system, both globally and locally, it is quite difficult to isolate and pinpoint single factors that lead to currency depreciation. As I've mentioned, there are many factors in play. Some of the main ones, theoretical ones, I've enumerated before. But to practically assess currency depreciation, one needs to dig further and do specific studies.
What impact has this depreciation had on the Mauritian economy, especially in terms of inflation, cost of living for residents, and foreign investment?
In theory, exchange rate dynamics vary with the inflation rate. Okay, inflation will tend to increase demand for foreign currency. So this contributes to depreciation of the currency. Indeed, recent data reveal that this is what our country is experiencing at the moment, a positive relation between these two variables. With regards to foreign direct investment, a depreciating currency will lower the cost of assets to foreign investors, the cost of local assets to foreign investors. So this represents an incentive for them to invest further in the economy. However, studies reveal that this is true mainly for firms that were initially exporting. This depreciation can also signal foreign firms that the economy is being efficient and is experiencing productivity gains, okay? Especially if it is demand-driven. In the Mauritian case, indeed, FDI as a percentage of GDP using IMF data reveals that there is an increasing trend in FDI from about 2.4% to more than 5% from 2013 to 2023, a period when the Mauritian currency was experiencing depreciation vis-à-vis the US dollar. A recent study has confirmed the positive impact of depreciation on long-term investment in Mauritius. One cannot generalize to all sectors of the economy. Okay? There are some sectors that are more responsive and others that are not, or others won't ever respond to depreciation. If we look at the recent data, the 2020's data for Mauritius, we've seen that the main sectors that benefited from this depreciation, either directly or indirectly, are the real estate activities, the so-called integrated resort scheme, invest hotel scheme, and so on. But manufacturing, construction, and some financial services benefited less compared to how they performed in early 2010s. These data come from the Bank of Mauritius. Hence, there is a need for sector-specific attention because we cannot generalize the benefits in FDI to all sectors of the economy. And this is not just a case for Mauritius, okay? Many studies has confirmed this trend for other countries also. On the downside, depreciation for an import-dependent country like Mauritius means prices are soaring. So this will impact purchasing power of the general population. And this may also accentuate the gap between the rich and the poor. Eventually, it can also lead to a less productive labor market. So there is a need to act when it is time, that is now.
And Shamnaz, according to Statistics Mauritius, public debt reached more than 500 billion rupees in December 2023. With the general elections approaching, what measures can the new government take to reduce this public debt?
So rising public debt is not a phenomenon restricted to our country. In fact, world public debt reached spectacular level in the 2020s, aggravated especially by the health crisis. And public debt is still rising in many countries, reaching levels of more than 100% of their GDPs and even beyond. To cite a popular example, Singapore's public debt was about 130% of its GDP in the year 2020, while that of Mauritius was about 58% of its GDP. An IMF study in 2023 report that fiscal contraction is the best solution. They report that a fiscal contraction of about 0.4% will improve or lower public debt by about 2% in 5 years. However, the timing of this fiscal consolidation is important. It works better during a domestic boom, but it works even best when there is both a domestic and a world boom, a condition that is often rare. The study further reports that expenditure cuts is much more efficient than a rise in revenue. And the usual boosters like strong institutions and growth-enhancing policies will work to reduce public debt in the short and long term. However, fiscal consolidation is not without its consequences. In the short term, it hinders GDP growth and causes unemployment to some extent. A reduction in government expenditure can have a negative impact on social welfare sometimes. It will mostly affect the lower income group, and it may accentuate inequality. We also have the play of exchange rate fluctuations that will offset any gains that the country may have with fiscal consolidation. In general, when fiscal consolidation is not enough, countries resort to debt restructuring, but this is, of course, a last resort instrument. What does it mean? It is simply the renegotiations of the terms of payment with creditors, which may take the form of reduced interest payment or extension of payment period, or even a reduction in the principal amount. So as an example, the Seychelles resorted to debt restructuring in the year 2008 following the crisis. It managed to reduce its debt from about 180% of its GDP to just 84% of its GDP. However, debt restructuring doesn't work by itself. The country still has to improve its general health condition, including strengthening its institutions, adopting healthy growth policies, and so on.
So, Shamnaz, what can Mauritius do to encourage its diaspora to return and contribute to its economy?
First thing, there should be some engagement and information strategies. because often the diaspora is at a loss. They feel there is no real opportunity in the country. One measure could be to set up a hotline desk or an interactive portal that can provide all the necessary information to the potential returnee, including changing the perceptions of the country of origin and showcasing the advantages of coming back to the country and contribute to the economy. Lithuania has such a policy. They have what is called a Work in Lithuania project, where they rebrand their country and provide information and support immigrants to come back. Second, I guess there should be a guarantee for employment for all returnees. This is something that could be added to this help desk or to this portal. It could also act as an employment agency for returnees. Often, the returnee will only feel safe if they can maintain their living standards and if their talent is needed in the country. But usually they don't have all the information because they have been away for a long time, so such a portal would really help them. There is another country, another interesting example. For instance, Slovakia, they have a re-entry subsidy, a one-time re-entry subsidy that they give to immigrants to encourage them to come back to the country and settle. Another example is Portugal. Portugal, they have an online tool which is called a Global Professional Mobility Platform. It is specific for the recruitment of returnees. So you can log on to this portal and find out if there's a job waiting for you in your country of origin. So this is really useful and practical and make the potential returnee, give them another incentive to return. There are other services or tools that can be used to attract the immigrant or the diaspora in general. But they have to be effective, these tools. A third thing, to encourage the returnee to settle and work in the country and contribute to the economy, is to facilitate integration not only of the returnee but also of the returnee's family in general. Because at present, many of them feel that they are being relegated to a second position, especially when they are not so familiar with how things work in the country. In sum, reintegration support and general assistance would be very useful. In general, assistance in terms of finding employment, housing, and information on general welfare schemes all would be useful to attract the diaspora to come back and settle and work in the country.
Well, thank you, Shamnaz. It was a very, very insightful discussion.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on this platform. It was really interesting.
Thanks.
Thank you. That's all for today's episode.
See you in the next one.